So I always feel like I have to start with, what does off-platform even mean? My title is Deputy Off-Platform Editor. Luckily, I am used to explaining my job. Before this, I was the Director of Global Adaptation at BuzzFeed and then the Global Growth Editor at the New York Times. So I'm used to explaining my job, and I always know when I have to explain a job, it's a good thing because we're doing something new. Sorry, I'm trying to hold too many things. Okay, so the easiest way to explain to you what my job is to explain to you what it is not. So the easiest way to explain off-platform is to explain to you what on-platform means. So on-platform, as you see here, means our website, app, email, push alerts. You probably receive all of the, I hope, receive these from the New York Times. You can think of this as the core of what we do, our brand, what you know us as, and where you come to us for what you would expect from the New York Times. What this doesn't include is everywhere else that you may encounter the Times. Let me just. So this is what we control. I would say this is like our house, and you have to keep your house in order. Luckily, we have a whole team that focuses on all of this. But before I explain further and tell you a little bit more about what off-platform is, I want to give you a little map to what I'll talk about today. So I'll talk about three things. The first is distribution. It's about reaching the right people at the right time with the right coverage. And then coverage, which is about listening and telling stories that are important to people, that people are curious about, that people want to know about. And then why all of this is so important right now. I think this affects the health of the whole news ecosystem globally. It's all about trust, and we're seeing declining levels of trust across all institutions, but specifically on social, where, I mean, I think we all know about the 2016 election in the US and kind of the dominoes after that worldwide. So this is off-platform. This is an incomplete list of what our team works on. And why this is so important is because our news judgment and kind of editorial judgment is slightly different on and off-platform, which I'll show you in a little bit. So success off-platform really means understanding the platform, understanding the people on the platform, how they talk, how they interact. You can't just parachute into Instagram or Twitter. You'll come off as like the old person on TikTok, right? So it's really about deeply understanding each of these platforms. And just being native to the platform. You would share things on Instagram a certain way versus Facebook versus Twitter versus Apple News or on search. So for a while, there was this idea of being platform agnostic, right? It meant whatever we don't care where you encounter us, read us wherever, whether that's on the newspaper, the radio, television. But what it actually meant was everything that we publish in the newspaper, we're just going to put on the internet. And that didn't take into account that the internet was a force that could actually change the very thing we were making. So I would say the true pioneers really understood the revolutionary power of the internet and found that it was a new tool for storytelling and journalism. So that same idea is where I think we're going with off-platform. So I think we're moving away from like platform agnostic to platform orthodox. So it's not about not knowing about the platform, not caring. It's about being very intentional and specific about each platform, why you're on it, who you're trying to reach with what. So what does that look like day to day? I get this question a lot. It looks different every day. Sometimes I'll literally be writing tweets. Other days I'll be managing a team. Other days I'm thinking about our long-term strategy. But here's one example to kind of show you the types of editorial decisions we're making. So in this image, this was from the State of the Union address this year. This is US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi clapping at President Trump after his speech. And if you were kind of on the internet that evening, this was the image on social that night. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was sharing it. It quickly became a meme, right? People were sharing their own versions of it on all sorts of angles. So we posted it on Instagram. What you'll see here is we did not put it on our front page, and we did not put it on our homepage, right? So again, this was the biggest social story, and the Times should absolutely be involved in that story and be part of the conversation. But it doesn't mean we have to cover that story the same way on each of these platforms, right? So even these 3 examples are an example of being kind of intentional with each platform. So you'll see on our homepage that evening, we had a video. On the front page, we had a long piece about kind of the sweeping analysis of what happened that night. So I should say also that's one of our top Instagram posts in the last couple of years. And it just goes to show you it's about being part of the conversation and really understanding that platform and what people are talking about. Okay, so this is also, this is one of the joys of working at the Times. So that photo was actually taken by Doug Mills, who's our White House photographer. He's one of the best. And what we also didn't do that night was kind of jump into the memes and share all the different memes, because that would have been strange for the New York Times too, because people don't expect that from us. So what we did instead was provide a backstory. It was about photography. It was about telling the story behind the story. It was about showing our work and sharing the stories of the people behind the work. So this is a photo of Doug taking that photo of Nancy Pelosi, which was really cool. So we were able to, tell a social story in a different way and also provide something extra. So why am I telling you all of this? And what do you need to know about me? So there are kind of 3 relevant things to know about me. I'm obsessed with how people get and share news. I worked at the American Press Institute, which is a journalism think tank in the US that is about how people get their news and how news organizations are changing and adapting to digital. So we've done a lot of user research about how people get their news, why, when, what they use news for. I also like to peer around the corner and anticipate change. During my time at BuzzFeed, we launched the BuzzFeed News app, and it was at the height of mobile when we were reaching that point where more people were accessing news on their phones than on their computers. And I really think we changed the game in terms of push notifications and rethinking how people experience news on a phone. And then also when I was Director of Global Adaptation, it was all about understanding how information travels around the world and on the internet. I worked with the 11 international editions that BuzzFeed had at the time, and translating and adapting news and seeing what resonated in different places. And then finally, I'm a systems thinker. I'm sure many of you are too. And to me, what that means is I like to understand the individual parts, but also understanding how all of those parts fit together and how they intersect, how they work, and what other forces might affect this, right? So it's been really fun for me to be at the Times right now. I've been there for about 2 years. So I get to kind of understand the Times for its individual parts, but really understand how it affects the rest of the news ecosystem. So those are just 3 things to know about me. So I share those 3 things and a little bit more about my experience to share. It shapes how I think about the moment we're in right now. And in my role specifically, I do think we're at a pivotal point with social and media platforms right now. I think I talked about trust earlier. Hold on, I just want to make sure I have all the points for you. So trust is a huge issue. I also think we're in this stage of great debate in the US over platforms. And what we've seen is that a lack of oversight has great consequence, right? I mentioned the 2016 election, but there are countless other elections as well. The good news is we have a bunch of smart people working on our business side who are thinking through that critical question of what is our business relationship with these platforms? What's our relationship with Facebook? What's our relationship with Twitter, et cetera? So where I come into this is I have to be a responsible steward of the risk and value of each of these platforms, because there's so much journalism, there's so much potential that is on these platforms, but we also have to be careful and cognizant of all the risks. So here is one example. I hope you have seen this. It's our reconstruction of how the Notre Dame fire happened and how it was saved. And you know, France was our top country for readership on this, and we typically see our top readership outside of the U.S. from Canada, the UK, Australia. It's, you know, major English language countries. So what we did here was we basically did scores of interviews. We reviewed hundreds of documents to kind of reconstruct those first 4 hours and to help guide readers through what happened. I tried to capture this in this GIF, but there's just tremendous visual and graphics and photography and video work to really rebuild this narrative. And so about a third of the views to this piece was from social, and I would say that was driven a lot by different types of groups sharing it, right? So whether you were just, you know, a general reader of the Times, or whether you were someone in France on this France subreddit, or if you were a firefighter and wanted to enter it through that angle, or if you're someone in Paris impacted by it and it meant a lot to you. So a lot of that social sharing, I would say, led to us reaching an audience that who wouldn't have otherwise come to the Times for coverage of Notre Dame. And you do that through distinctive journalism and social media, right? So that first example was a lot about distribution. This one is about coverage. So I talk a lot about feedback loops, and this is a big part of that. So not only are we using social to distribute, I would say that's only half, if that, part of social. The other half is really about taking in signals from your audience, no matter where they are. So this is our coverage of Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey Hussle was a rapper based in LA, and he was shot and killed. And he was known for, obviously, his music, but also his philanthropic ventures. And something that was really big and notable about him was that he grew up in LA and became big and stayed in that community. So there's a really interesting story there. And what we started seeing after this happened was that Nipsey Hussle became one of the biggest search and most interacted terms on social in 2019 so far. This happened in April. And you know, my question to my colleagues at the Times and to all of you is, would this have been as big of a story 10 years ago, if not for all of those signals that we were seeing from people on search and social searching for it and signaling and trying to tell us the demand that they wanted for this, to read more about him, to read more about his community, to read more about the impact he's had. So this was our coverage from his funeral. So where are we and what's different now? Those were some of the benefits, you know, reaching people, reaching the right people, covering things that matter to people. But what's different is that all of these things are happening much faster, right? So, you know, I think a lot about misinformation and trust and all of that on social platforms. And I think about how people have always shared information, right? Whether that was talking with people, whether that was writing a letter or sending an email, and now it's social. And misinformation has always existed. There have been tabloids. The US used to spread propaganda through radio. You had to like tune in to listen, and it took a really long time to kind of spread a message. But now, I should say, these fonts are slightly different, but it's still quite a lovely font for those who care about text and typography. So what's different now is that the feedback loops are tighter and faster, right? The scale is unprecedented. And this is something I'm really grateful to have been at BuzzFeed for, right? So what we really learned there was the scale that the internet helped us understand is unprecedented. So you can reach so many more people so much faster. And what I mean about feedback loops being tighter and faster is that instead of waiting like days and weeks and months, you like get information at seconds, and then people react to it, and then you have that feedback loop. So they're tighter and faster, which means, and then if you take that and spread it across the globe because of the internet, it's crazy, right? And I would say one more thing to that is that the combination of social, which is all of these platforms we're on and communicating on and sharing on, combined with mobile. So, you know, like I have my phone on me all the time. I'm sure you do too. It's like, may as well be connected to my body. So it's really personal too. So this is where we're at, right? So we can reach more people faster and in a more personal way. So to me, that means we have to be more cognizant about, one, people's behavior, so why they share the things they do, understanding kind of human psychology. A lot of 2016 election aftermath and all of the misinformation was, you know, it wasn't just bots, it was people sharing things. So I think it's really critical that we understand that as well. So with the spread of misinformation on platforms and increasingly the attacks on the press, it's even more important that we do this work and do it well, especially on social platforms like Facebook or Twitter and Instagram, because those are the people who may not trust your news organization. They may not know the New York Times. They may not know our brand. So there's more imperative for them, for us to show them what we're all about and to help them understand what we do. The New York Times mission is to seek truth and help people understand the world. So if you're just encountering us in your feed, how do we demonstrate that in the easiest, clearest way possible? And one answer to that is transparency, right? This is one of many, many answers to the declining trust. But this is just about showing your work. And what I mean by that is, how do you know what you know? So these are 3 examples here, whether it's saying that, being very explicit about, we talked to 24 former staffers, or we reviewed 100,000 pages of documents related to Trump's taxes, or we reviewed drone footage and spoke with people on the ground after the Genoa bridge collapse in Italy. These are all ways to really make it clear to readers who, again, may not know how news works. I sometimes read surveys about how people think news is made, and they think people, like journalists pay for news. They think all these crazy things. So I think it's really imperative for journalists and people in the media to demonstrate and be transparent about how they know what they know, how they go about their work. And the great thing about this, I should say, is that this is replicable. Like, anyone can do this. You don't need to be a big newsroom. You don't need to be a global newsroom. You just need to be clear with your readers and transparent with your readers to like begin to build that trust. Does anyone listen to the Daily in here? Yeah, of course. But you know, if you listen to the Daily, something you'll hear often is our reporters will come on and talk about what they're working on, how they know what they know, how they got the story. And I think that is such a critical part of the media literacy that has been declining, and that we're kind of rebuilding up as people get news from the internet and everywhere else. And that's a clip from our TV show that launched earlier this year, which we're doing a lot of the same in a different way. So I'll end here, which is to say multiple things can be true at once, right? So I think we all know a lot of people who have stopped using social platforms for one reason or another, whether that's hyperpolarization, a distrust, or just fatigue because it doesn't make them feel good. Simultaneously, though, we're all spending more time than ever on our phones. So if you look at your time spent, your screen time on your phone, I'm sure it might be similar to this. I've looked at mine, and it is. This is a chart about the number of hours an average American spends on digital media. And adult Americans are spending upwards of 6 hours with digital media. And I think, I think that's why there's a cognitive dissonance, because people are leaving these platforms, but at the same time, we're all using our phones more and are more connected than ever. So this is just to keep in mind. So what should we do? So you have this crazy misinformation happening, but you also have all this news happening online that we should cover, and that's important to people, and we use to understand what people want us to cover. So I don't have any of the answers, I'm sorry. And I think anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years is lying. But this is my hypothesis. This is my best guess for kind of the foundation we need to build to understand these times. They're kind of 3 parts, right? It's news and media. How does information travel across the internet and around the world? How do people consume news? What are all the ways publishers deliver their news? I can't even tell you how many platforms the New York Times delivers on. I work on most of our big ones, but we distribute in so many different ways. Psychology and human behavior, right? When I talked about social and mobile and how personal and human-driven and emotional that is, I think it's really important to understand how our psychology affects why we share what we share. The one tip I will say is, if you haven't already, I would recommend reading this book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize in Economics a couple years ago for his work, and it's all about how we make decisions and our hidden biases. It's fascinating. It changed my life. It's very interesting. Oh, and then obviously technology and platforms, right? Do we understand the technology and algorithms behind what's shown to us? So do you know why you see certain things on Twitter? Do you know why you see something on Facebook? Do you know why you see something on Instagram? Do you know why you're receiving a search result on Google? And I think if you were to ask any average person, they probably don't think about that, but I think it's increasingly important that we understand where our news comes from and why we see what we do. And I should say, I also ask that as a consumer, just as a person in the world using all of these services, and also as a journalist, right? So how do we take that information, and how do we push our news organizations to think about it and address it and work within that system? So I don't have any answers, but this is my hypothesis. And I think I'm out of time, so thank you so much.
Est-ce que vous avez des questions pour Millie Tran, en français ou en anglais, on peut traduire. Donc Millie Tran est une des étoiles montantes du New York Times. On est très heureux de l'avoir reçue aujourd'hui dans le cadre de Médias en Seine. Elle a fait un long chemin pour venir jusqu'à nous. On trouve que c'est important d'avoir quelqu'un de l'intérieur qui nous raconte un peu comment le journal a réussi cette prouesse. Des questions, j'en vois.
Sorry, I have a microphone.
Super.
I have a question about your TV programming, because I tried to connect and I have to have Hulu, but in France we don't have Hulu. So when are you coming to Europe? How will we be able to see it?
That I don't know, but because you're asking, I'm going to make sure you get it somehow. But I don't have an answer, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Just a quick question. For the readership, what is, I guess it's 2 questions. So between on-platform, all your app, website, print, and off-platform, sort of, what is the thing that brings the most readership? What, I guess, is it the app? Is it the website? Is it Instagram?
Our search and social are biggest drivers of all traffic for us, right? So I talked about the app first because that's where our most loyal readers are. It's people who come to us directly, which is really important for any business that's a subscription business, right? But search and social are the biggest ways people see the Times and discover us. So you can think of off-platform almost as a way to bring in readers and bring in new readers, and then the app and push alerts and newsletters and all of that are ways to keep them.
And then I guess my question bis was, in just within the social media, do you have a social media that brings more readership than others? Do you find that you get more clicks from Instagram or views on Facebook?
I would say Facebook and Twitter are two of our biggest channels. Instagram's really interesting, right? Because it used to be a very visual platform, but I think now a lot of people are getting more news and information on it. So we're starting to see uptick in people using Instagram for news and discovering us and using us for that. I think something that people are often surprised about is that Twitter is a huge referral source for us. And I think it's the combination of people who are obsessed with news and on Twitter, and we break a lot of news, so it works.
Thanks.
Hi. There is a new network, which name is TikTok, that you might know. What do you think about this, since it's a kind of controversial platform? Does the New York Times want to go in? Is it in already?
You know, I joke with our newsroom a lot that if anyone asks me about whether we should be on TikTok, I'm leaving.
Okay, thank you.
The Washington Post is on TikTok. I go to Vietnam every year to visit my family, and my little cousins are all on TikTok, just like watching all the time, hours. It's insane. They're all on TikTok and YouTube. I think what's really interesting for me as someone who is thinking about these platforms from the New York Times perspective is, are people actually using this platform for news and information? And how do we balance, if they're not, with the potential growth, right? I would say right now it doesn't make sense for us, but I love the platform. I think it's a really interesting way to build. It's not really a social network in that it breaks the social graph, right? If you think about how we use like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, it's about people you follow and them kind of connecting that. TikTok breaks all of that. You just open the app and you see videos. And it's all AI driven, and I think that's really interesting and has a lot of potential. So I'm watching it very closely, and I'm going to Vietnam soon, so I'm going to see if my little cousins are still on it.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question. Is there such a thing as being too much of platform?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I just finished a panel at the Radio France about platforms specifically, and that's something that keeps coming up, right? And I think the only way I can do my job well and focus on our growth off-platform is because that slide I showed you about on-platform, right? I think that's our core. That is our brand. It's what people value us for and what they know us for, and you have to have your house in order first, right, before you go do other things. And I think if we didn't have such a strong app and website and things that people know us for and are distinctive, then it's hard to do the other thing, right? Or it would be much more about balancing. But because we have a strong on-platform presence, I can go kind of full energy and full force into off-platform. So yeah, I think it's really important to have both. It's hard because some publishers will chase purely growth, but I do think it's really important to think about retention and your core business and your most loyal readers. So one thing I will also say that was really interesting, just a couple weeks ago with all the impeachment and Ukraine news, we saw our views to our homepage go up significantly, right? So we know that in moments of breaking news, in moments of complicated breaking news, people are coming directly to us. And I think that's really important because not only are they seeing us on their feeds, but they know when they need us, we'll hopefully deliver. So.